The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The situation in my home country of Argentina surrounding the suspicious death of prosecutor Alberto Nisman has just gotten even more bizarre as a draft of an arrest request for Argentinian President Cristina Kirchner has now been found apparently in the trash can of the dead prosecutor's home. And to catch you up if you haven't been following this story, Alberto Nisman was, now deceased, a prosecutor in Argentina who had long been researching the Iranian connection to the early 90s attack at a Jewish community center in Argentina, which is considered one of the largest specifically anti-Semitic attacks in recent history over the last 20, 30 years. And he claimed to have evidence that the Argentinian president, Cristina Kirchner, was negotiating behind the scenes with Iran in a way that would shield them from being ultimately confirmed as responsible for that attack. And there were other shady dealings involved there. Alberto Nisman claimed to have audio recordings of such conversations taking place between government officials and Iran. And hours before he was set to testify about these allegations and about the evidence that he was found dead in his apartment. Initially, almost immediately, it was called a suicide. Of course, some said, no, this is probably the Kirchner administration trying to knock him off before he testifies. Others said, well, maybe it was Iran who had an interest in knocking this guy off before he more definitively links the country to the attacks on the Jewish community center from the 90s. Fast forward a week or so, and Cristina Kirchner came out and said, I no longer think that this was a suicide. I believe that it was a murder, but it was a murder by someone who doesn't like my administration, knowing that it would be blamed on me. And the latest data now, Lewis, is that a draft of an arrest request for the president, a 26-page document, was found in the garbage at Alberto Nisman's apartment. It also sought the arrest of Hector Timerman, who's Argentina's foreign minister. Both Kirchner and Timerman have repeatedly denied Nisman's accusation that they were trying to reach this deal with Iran to lift the international arrest warrants for Iranian officials that may have been involved in that bombing. And Cristina Kirchner has not commented specifically on the arrest, but she has said that generally the allegations made by Nisman are completely baseless. I have to say, we don't know the circumstances of why that arrest request had been drafted. Was it something that Nisman planned to present and actually try to arrest the president? Is this something that someone at gunpoint forced Alberto Nisman to type up, as unlikely as it seems that would lead to a 26-page document? But this is getting incredibly bizarre.
And why was it in the garbage? And depending on the motivation behind the person who shot them, might they have gone through the house and tried to remove evidence like that, or other things that might have been problematic?
And let's not forget, Lewis, let's not forget that this also is now coming, it is getting in the way of having an ultimate determination about what did happen in that Jewish community center bombing during the 90s. And one of the best ways to distract from a scandal is to create a new one, and then to create a new one based on that scandal. And that's exactly what's going on. And it's been 21 years since this bombing. And still, as much as we have inferred and assume about who was behind that bombing, we still don't have a final determination. And I don't think there's any question that we can say here that the Argentinian the current government, the Kirchner administration, is certainly not helping to have a final determination as to who was responsible.
Not at all. And now, perhaps, if Nisman was working alone, we may never find out what happened.
You probably remember that not that long ago, when we had the Ebola non-outbreak here in the U.S., some right-wingers were blaming so-called illegal aliens, undocumented immigrants from Central and South America, for bringing Ebola potentially over the border. Of course, that was completely bogus, but we now have a Republican suggesting that what we are now seeing as a measles outbreak in the United States might be connected, again, to so-called illegal aliens who he believes are not vaccinated. This is our old friend from Alabama, Republican Mo Brooks. You might remember him. We've talked about him on the program many times. He was on some radio show, who even knows, something. And here's what he had to say. Let's take a listen.
The liberal press is trying to make hay with this story concerning an outbreak of measles, and we have had a significant uptick in 2014. Do you believe there's a correlation between the number of individuals coming into the country unvaccinated for the measles and the number of cases that we've seen across the United States?
Yeah.
I don't think there is any healthcare professional who has examined the facts who could honestly say that Americans have not died because the disease is brought into America by illegal aliens who are not properly healthcare screened as lawful immigrants are. It might be the enterovirus that has a heavy presence in Central and South America that has caused deaths of American children over the past 6 to 9 months. It might be this measles outbreak. There are any number of things.
Any number of things. I like how he says that there hasn't been anyone who has specifically researched and ruled out that it might be coming from Central and South America, unvaccinated, undocumented immigrants. In the same way, Lewis, that nobody has researched whether it could be extraterrestrial aliens who have actually brought measles down. Nobody has ruled that out through a proper scientific investigation.
And no one has researched if it was President Obama himself directly injecting measles into these kids at Disneyland. That could be an option too.
Now, on the facts, he is also completely wrong, because many of the countries he's mentioning, or at least alluding to, have higher vaccination rates than the United States. In Mexico, remember, the U.S. has a 92% vaccination rate for measles. Mexico has a 99% vaccination rate. Nicaragua, 99%. Panama, 98%. Belize, 96%. Guatemala, 93%. Honduras, 93%. El Salvador, 93%. Most of these countries have a higher vaccination rate than the U.S. It seems to kind of throw a monkey wrench into Mo Brooks's hypothesis.
Even if it was some Central or South American child who had measles and went to Disneyland for some reason, the outbreak still would not have been this bad had people just been vaccinating their children here in this country.
It might have been weaponized measles from the Muslims, as people like Mo Brooks like to say. That's not been ruled out either.
This guy is incredible. We have had many stories on Mo Brooks, and it's always something at this level of insanity.
You might remember kind of in the middle or towards the end of 2014, Glenn Beck, right-wing radio host, stood up and actually clapped for parents who were not having their children vaccinated. He now is saying that anti-vaxxers are being persecuted like Galileo. I know, that might not make any sense to you, but let me play for you what Glenn Beck had to say about it.
God gave me a brain. God gave me personal choice and responsibility for those choices. I'm going to say no to those vaccines because I've done my homework. Here's another group of people that are now being rounded up and pointed at and called morons and idiots and crackpots and crazies. Just totally discredited. If you stand out of line, where is anybody saying, my gosh, we're living in the days of Galileo?
As it happens, it's the exact opposite of Galileo being persecuted. Galileo was being persecuted by those who didn't want to accept the science. Galileo had the science on his side. Anti-vaccine individuals are being, I think persecuted is the wrong term, are being critiqued because they are choosing to ignore the science to push a scienceless anti-vaccine agenda. It's the exact opposite of what happened to Galileo.
It is the exact opposite. And Glenn Beck I think he's made this comparison before with either Galileo or Copernicus or something like that, not realizing, of course, that it's a reversal with the religion and the science. And
earlier in the segment, Glenn Beck does talk about the increase in the prevalence of autism. And I actually think that that's a really serious discussion that we should be having. But to simply assume that because we don't know what it is, it must be vaccines is kind of like a God of the gaps hypothesis, where anything we can't explain, we say God must have done it. Any condition we can't explain, we say vaccines must have done it. And if you consider the amount of pollution that industrialization and the modern world have put into our atmosphere, if you consider the amount of processed food that people are consuming, there are so many things that really warrant investigation when it comes to the prevalence of autism. And let's not forget that an increase in the diagnosis of autism based on how we diagnose could be hugely responsible as well. Whereas 100 years ago, you might have had what now are considered autism spectrum disorders just kind of written off as your kid is not that smart, right? That was a common way in which many conditions that we now understand used to be written off in your kid's not that smart or other ways, right? That's just an example. So the fact that we have now wrapped in many more combinations of symptoms as autism spectrum disorders also can't be ignored.
And I mean, if as you said, we've seen an increase in autism, but I mean, across the board, we've been getting vaccinated up until recently. And you know, if it was the vaccines, why would autism be going up now? I think we're surrounded by more crap than ever in this country. We need to look at everything.
I have one of the dumbest political ideas in a long time under the guise of liberty and freedom. Senator Thom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, argued that restaurants should be allowed to opt out of certain health department regulations. For example, one that requires employees to wash their hands after using the bathroom before they go back to prepare your food in the kitchen. He was at the Bipartisan Policy Center a couple of days ago, and here's what he had to say.
But I was having this discussion with someone, and we were at a Starbucks in my district. And we were talking about certain regulations where I felt like maybe you should allow businesses to opt out. If let an industry or business opt out as long as they indicate through proper disclosure, through advertising, through employment literature, whatever else. There's this level of regulations that maybe they're on the books, but maybe you can make a market-based decision as to whether or not they should apply to you. And she said, you know, I can't believe that. She said, opting out. And at that time, we were sitting back at a table that was near the restrooms, and one of the employees just came out. She said, for example, don't you believe that this regulation that requires this gentleman to wash his hands before he serves your food is important, should be on the books? As a matter of fact, I think it's one that I can illustrate the point. I said, I don't have any problem with Starbucks if they choose to opt out of this policy, as long as they post a sign that says, we don't require our employees to wash their hands after leaving the restroom. The market will take care of that. And so, I mean, it's one example, but then let them decide.
How much research should people be required to do to be fully informed about a restaurant's policy? That's why we have regulations, right? And we could even take it a step further. Don't require restaurants to properly store and prepare food, right? Separating raw from cooked meat, maintaining meat and dairy cold overnight. Let restaurants opt out of that, and then people can just decide, oh, this restaurant doesn't follow basic food safety standards, so I'm going to choose not to go here, and the free market will kind of take care of it all. And Lewis, why stop at food safety? Let's apply it to all companies. Why force health insurance companies to insure those with pre-existing conditions? They can just say, we don't insure people with pre-existing conditions. Customers will see that and then say, oh, yeah, I don't want this. This is a mean company, so I'll go somewhere else. The free market will take care of everything.
And when you live in that small town in Texas, right next to some chemical plant, and it's the only place you can get a job, excuse me, what's going on there? When you walk in the first day and it says, there's a big sign that says, we do not have inspections of our equipment or our facilities ever. That this idea that the free market will just handle everything is absurd.
And apply it to child labor laws. Hey, we employ 9-year-olds. We don't need child labor protections because people know it's bad to force or to employ a 9-year-old to hard labor, to working in a kitchen. So they put up a sign and people just won't go. It makes perfect sense. And let's take it a step further. This is not even fiscally conservative because you would still have a regulatory agency which needs to make sure that the agencies are, or that the restaurants are, number one, still compliant with the policies they haven't opted out of, and number two, that they're properly signing or disclosing the policies that they have opted out of. So it wouldn't even save us anything with regard to regulation. In fact, it would just make things even more complicated.
Also, it seems like his idea is based on the assumption that you are walking into a business and you are dealing directly with that business, that product, and their employees. Well, what if you're at Walmart buying a pair of pants that were made in America by 5-year-olds? And, would there have to be signage on that? Would there be
right.
signage
The signs
at Walmart?
might be at the factory, but they might not be at Walmart. I mean, it's just an absurd idea, this opt-out mentality. And we've seen the opt-out mentality with the Hobby Lobby case. We see it all the time. And Senator Tillis here is just way off. One of the dumbest ideas I've heard in a long time. Some dumb ideas also come to us via Hatriot Mail, which is coming up right after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is mostly funded by individual members through the David Pakman Show membership program, and today's new member of the day is Mary Wilson. Mary, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member, and I have 2 discounted memberships from $60 discounted all the way down to $31, sponsored by a very generous member of our show in honor of my 31st birthday. I have 2 of those memberships left. If you want one of the 2, email us through our website, davidpakman.com, and we will get that set up for you. It is a very, very crazy edition of Hatriot Mail today.
The right of the people to keep and bear hate shall not be infringed. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
This is such a funny one. I call this the Luris edition of Hatriot Mail. Listen to this.
Something about this David guy is just rubbing me the wrong way. I especially dislike his weasel-looking co-ho, Luris.
Lewis, I mean, that his co-ho Luris. Now, you think that part of that might be deliberate.
Coho may be deliberate. I may be a hoe. I don't know. But Luris, I don't know about that one.
Usually people just spell Lewis's name as the last name, Lewis. That's very common. But Luris, Luris, is just incredible. And to be honest, you've not been accused in the past, Lewis, of looking like a weasel.
No, weasel. Other things, yes. Weasel, no. I don't know. It's he's entitled to his opinion.
Very interesting story from Al Jazeera. Shortly after news broke of the deadly January 27th attack by Islamic terrorists on a hotel in Libya's capital, Al Jazeera English executive Carlos Van Meek sent an email out to his employees about the language that can and cannot be used to describe that incident. And it's been obtained now, it is leaked, and it is very, very interesting, where he said they are not to use the word extremist and to avoid characterizing people. Quote, often their actions do the work for the viewer. Could write violent group if we're reporting on Boko Haram agreeing to negotiate with the government. In other words, reporting on a violent group that's in the news for a non-violent reason. Using the words terrorism or terrorist. One person's terrorist is another's freedom fighter. We will not use these terms unless attributed to a source or person. Following the publication of a piece about the leaked email, a spokeswoman for Al Jazeera English pointed to a YouTube video back from November explaining that the network decided to ban the term Islamist, saying that they are not going to use that term. But unfortunately, that video doesn't explain these emails that say that we are not going to use the term terrorist, we are not going to use the word jihadist, we are not going to talk about militants, and it also doesn't explain why Carlos Van Meek said these words are off limits to our correspondents. Now, there's two ways to look at this. One is they're looking at complex issues without succumbing to using these words that are filled with bias and increasingly have very little meaning. Another view is that without using these words, you cannot have a substantive and accurate discussion of issues that involve extremists and jihadists and terrorists. And I tend to think, Lewis, that having this blanket policy from above, that we are not going to talk about terrorists because one person's terrorist is another's freedom fighter, is a pretty dangerous territory to get into.
When you think about different stories and the way they could be covered, for example, the Jordanian pilot who was just burned alive. If the reporter says a Jordanian pilot was burned alive in a cage by ISIS terrorists today, or they say a Jordanian pilot was burned alive in a cage by members of ISIS today, do you need to use the word terrorist? Because
that's the argument they're making, right?
Yeah.
Which is we will report on the actions and that speaks for itself.
And if you want to truly claim to be an unbiased news outlet, perhaps that is the best way to go if you want the audience to decide for themselves what a terrorist is.
Fair enough. And the problem I'm having is that while this is the policy on Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera Arabic has no problem using those words whatsoever, as well as having unrebuked anti-Semitic voices on and using those words in a way that is completely opposite to how they might be used on Al Jazeera English. So there's what I see as a huge, huge double standard. Even if you agree conceptually with never using those words, the fact that they are strategically not being used in one division of Al Jazeera and being used in others for different purposes, that to me is a real concern right now.
Yeah, and I wouldn't put all of these words into the same category as terrorist either. I think some of them, they're just different words.
The Supreme Court has declined to overturn a lower court's ruling that an insurance company was within bounds when firing a breastfeeding mother because men can also lactate. Thus, it was not a sexist or gender-based decision. This is a story involving nationwide insurance company employee Angela Ames, who sued when she got back from maternity leave. She said, I need to be able to pump breast milk. And they said, oh, yeah, we don't have a place for you to do that right now. You can go and use some room for that. And it turned out that that room had other people in it and it didn't even have a locking door. And subsequently, she was actually let go. She was actually forced to resign. If we're going to, I want clarity this evening. She wasn't let go. She was dictated a resignation letter, which she was then coerced into signing. And the Supreme Court agreed with the lower court's decision that it's not sexist what they did. They are not discriminating against women, because men can also lactate. And this to me is one of the most ridiculous explanations I have ever heard, Lewis. Men lactate sometimes because of a medical condition that is not desirable. It is a disease or a pathology, not as part of normal child-raising function. It seems absurd to give this explanation.
It sounds like you're just playing games when you give an argument like that, and it's embarrassing. I don't understand how it can come to that. If you want to take an argument like this, you could apply it to so many different things.
Yeah, I mean, what about it's not discrimination to fire someone for being black because white people can get tan, right? That seems to me like the exact same thing.
Exactly the same thing. And it's okay. It's okay to fire someone because they're Jewish, because a Christian could convert to Judaism.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's just anybody could be Jewish, right? So it's not really firing someone based on their religious beliefs. It's just one of the most bizarre decisions I have ever heard. And you can tweet me about it if you disagree. Twitter.com/dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Bill Tatro, who's a teacher, talk show host, author, lecturer, and columnist at townhall.com. Bill, I was recently reading one of the articles on your website, and I'm kind of confused by it. So a good place, I think, might be for you to explain exactly what your position is on the kind of modern economy of today and on President Obama. In this article, you do point out some of the positive things that we're seeing in the economy, but it seems like you hesitate to say that this is truly a sign of good things. But maybe my read of it is just off. Talk to us about that.
Well, David, one of the problems that you've got with this, well, I should say any administration, but it seems to be more prevalent with the current one, is that they've taken the old adage of the question that was asked to the government official, what's 2 + 2? And he said, what do you need it to be? And the problem is that if we go back, let's go back 6 years when Mr. Obama first came in. The Bureau of Labor Statistics uses, when they give out the jobs report, and we'll get it this Friday, they give what they call the birth death. And the birth death is the number of jobs that were created that month by new businesses that were birthed, number of jobs that were lost by the businesses that died, the deaths, and that was it. And then you net them together. Historically, with Clinton, the Bushes, etc., it was, plus or minus 10, 15,000 either way. And then after a year, it would be corrected. Well, as we got in deeper and deeper into the Obama administration, you would find that it was plus 125,000 jobs, plus 150,000 jobs. These weren't actual jobs. This was just assumptions that were made by somebody that they thought that would be it. And so every time when you hear that last time we got 300,000 jobs, you have to look at birth death. After 12 months, it's corrected and it's put on the back pages. So the misinformation that's put forward that as we look at the unemployment rate, 5.6%, but that's discounting millions of people out of the participation pool.
Okay, but hold on a second, Bill, because there's a lot there.
There's a lot there.
Is your contention that unemployment is being measured differently today than it was under other presidents?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You're looking at people who, if I go out, if I'm unemployed, if I'm a chemist who can't get a job, and all of a sudden I mow my neighbor's lawn and get $20 to do it, I'm now not unemployed.
No, that's not true. If you go, that's simply untrue, Bill. And I think that most of our audience, after hearing me talk about this for a long time, knows that if you go out and mow your neighbor's lawn for $20, that has no impact whatsoever on whether the government considers you unemployed or not. Because if I lose a job and I file for unemployment, it doesn't matter whether I go and collect those $20 or not. If I'm considered unemployed, and that's just a factually untrue statement. I don't know where you came up with that.
Well, I disagree. All right. I mean, then we have that.
But you disagree, but it's not a matter of opinion. That's not how the Bureau of Labor Statistics measures an unemployed person. We have to be upfront with the audience here.
Well, I understand that. So what you're saying is that the number of people who are not part of the participation pool, and if there are you would then say that the number of people in the participation pool is accurate?
No, what I would say is that we are measuring unemployment, if we look at the U3 and the U6, in the exact same way today that we have done all the way back to Ronald Reagan. And there is absolutely no difference in the gap between the U3 and the U6, which includes, as you say, discouraged workers, those who are underemployed, etc. There is no difference in the space between the U3 and the U6 today as there was under Ronald Reagan, under George H.W. Bush, Clinton, W. Bush, etc. The idea that today the numbers are particularly deceptive because we're not considering discouraged workers and people no longer looking for work is flat out false. We have the data.
I disagree. And that's I totally disagree.
But so what data do you have from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that tells us that the U6 now relative to the U3 is particularly bad compared to Ronald Reagan? I mean, that's not the data that exists.
Then your contention is, and
it's not my contention. It's just the BLS data.
That the participation pool is accurate.
What I'm saying is that today, if we talk about the U3 compared to the U3 under Reagan or Bush or whoever, is measured the same way. But if we want to talk about the U6, it's also measured the same way. The problem is that many people today who want to disparage President Obama's economy say that he is presenting the U3 number as if it were the U6, and that's just simply not the case.
I don't think he's presenting U3 as the U6. I think that this administration gives misinformation.
But the data is from the BLS, and they've been presenting it in the same way since Reagan. So when you say that they give misinformation, what does that mean?
Well, if you simply take away the participation pool and you reduce the participation pool, you've in effect reduced your divisor. Why don't we just go to 4%? Based upon what you're saying, we will get to 4% unemployment, as President has said, very quickly. Now, we're not even discussing the quality of the job. We're not even discussing if it's the majority is in bartenders and people.
Okay, but Bill, now you're moving the goalposts, because let's have the conversation about wages and job quality. I'm glad to have that conversation, and I have that conversation with economists all the time. But that's a different issue than to say that right now, because of discouraged workers, we have a far worse situation than we did under Ronald Reagan's 6% unemployment, for example. That's just not supported by the data. Now, I would grant you that wages are absolutely lagging jobs in this recovery. That very often happens. We've finally seen some uptick in wages over the last year, although not last month. But do you realize that these are two separate issues?
Oh, absolutely. There's no. I'm glad that we can come together on something, and that the wages are lagging. But I just in your discussion of the participation pool, I'm sorry, I'm not on that page, David.
Yeah, but the problem I'm having conceptually with this bill, and I hope that this is clear to the audience, is it's great that you and I can come together, like we said, on the issue with wages. But the problem is you're saying it almost as if we just have different opinions. But the data from the BLS reflects what I said with regard to the unemployment rate. And the data from the BLS reflects what you and I happen to agree on with regard to wages. But I think we're getting a confusion between what the data says and what an opinion is, right? But those aren't the same thing.
Data and opinion are two different things. Yes, okay. I will grant you that. I will absolutely grant you that.
Do you believe that over the next 4 years, we may see some kind of a slowdown or correction when it comes to the job growth numbers that we've been seeing, as well as the stock market growth that we've been seeing? And if so, do you think it will depend on who the next president is, or do you believe that we're simply coming up on a correction to the economy, regardless of who is the next president?
Well, that's very interesting questions, because you're looking at correction and you're saying in the job growth, correction in the market. I have been one that has been saying all along that this market ultimately will have a major collapse. And I believe that much like the Japanese market did back in the early 90s, when it went from 40,000 down to less than 10,000, much as a 75% collapse. I think the same thing will happen here. The jobs, I think, we're already seeing it, David. I mean, you're looking at the amount of pink slips that are being given out in the oil patch. You're seeing now, just most recently, the announcement today of Staples and what is it, Home Depot or Job Depot or whatever, and the combination there, 100,000 people, thousands of businesses or thousands of stores will be closed, and there will be a lot of people laid off.
Yeah, but again, Bill, I think that's when we look at anecdotal instances of retail job slowdowns, that does not necessarily tell us something broadly about the economy, because in part retail is suffering because of the development of technology that makes it so people don't necessarily rely on those retail stores. But the job growth continues. We've had record consecutive month after month job growth dating back something like a decade, don't you think? It seems like you just don't believe the data.
No, I don't believe the data. I mean, let's start. We should have started from that point.
Did you believe the data from the BLS under other presidents, or did you always think that it was untrustworthy?
No, I have felt that it has gone aggressively. I mean, you can go back to George Washington and you can see that information provided by various presidents, sometimes you have to look at it with a jaundiced eye.
But Bill, again, we're talking not about information concocted by presidents. We're talking about an organization that has measured economic indicators in the same way for decades. So I think it's a moot comparison to say, hey, Washington made up some stuff.
Well, I think you're naively thinking that any of these organizations are politically
neutral,
isolated. You would say so. So your position, like on the Federal Reserve, would be, well, it's not a political organization. It's not under the government. So it has.
But again, I'm not talking about the Federal Reserve. I'm talking about the BLS.
I understand that, but I'm just saying that I believe that the BLS puts numbers, and as I said, 2 + 2. What does it need to be?
So you're saying that the BLS simply does what the president suggests?
I am saying, if we go that bluntly, yes.
All right. Well, I would love to see some evidence of that. I'm guessing you don't have it today, and it coincides with us being out of time. But I would love to have you back. I think it's great, Bill, that at least we agreed on the fact that wage stagnation is a serious issue. We probably would disagree as to what's causing it, but at least we agreed on that, right?
Well, David, every long journey, as the Chinese say, starts with one step, and I think we got at least one step today.
We have. Check out Bill Tatro on townhall.com. Thanks for being on, Bill.
Thank you, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Back in July, we told you that we had more and more proof from Kansas that tax cuts don't boost the economy. I told you that Governor Sam Brownback from Kansas, a Republican, took to the pages of Wall Street Journal to talk about how great his economic program has been in Kansas, in spite of the fact that their job creation has significantly lagged job creation across the country. And we really looked in detail at the numbers and pointed out what we really already know, that tax cuts do not boost an economy. We now have an even worse financial situation in Kansas. Further proof that Sam Brownback's supply-side policies have just been a disaster. The state fell $47 million short of expected tax collections in January. This is going to make it even more difficult for the state to balance the budget. They are literally running out of money. Overall, Kansas, through the first 7 months of 2014, was $59 million below what experts predicted they should have in order to be close to a balanced budget. There is going to be now a serious issue with the $280 million in budget cuts put forward by Governor Sam Brownback, not because they're cutting all sorts of meaningful programs, but because it appears that it will not even be enough, Lewis, to cover the lack of tax revenues in that state, a state that is having serious education issues, serious social program issues. It's just incredible that he continues to cheerlead.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. I guess he's too proud to admit that they made a mistake. But these are the types of policies that Republicans all over the country would want to implement. And this is a perfect example of what would happen if they did.
And the saddest thing is that voters in Kansas who start to be affected by the lack of money probably won't connect it to Sam Brownback's policies. They'll say that liberal Obama in Washington is causing these problems, when actually the Brownback administration's job creation is lagging the Obama economy's job creation. The tax cuts are being proposed and pushed by Sam Brownback. They have nothing to do with President Obama's policy. And this is exactly the same way as we talked about with the Medicaid expansion, where people say, hey, I don't have health care in spite of Obamacare. Yeah, but it doesn't have anything to do with Obama. It has to do with your Republican governor. It unfortunately may not lead to an electoral consequence within Kansas for Republicans.
No, if he runs again, I expect that his opponent will probably start pointing these things out. But yeah, you have to assume that most voters are not even paying attention to any of this.
Super interesting story involving Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird. I read yesterday that the publishing company for Harper Lee, which happens to be called Harper, announced that Harper Lee has agreed to a second book, sort of a sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. This is huge because in the 55 years since To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee has not published anything, known as very reclusive, known as not interested in attention, living in Alabama, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought this is just absolutely fantastic. And then I found out that this announcement comes just 2.5 months after the death of Harper Lee's sister and lawyer. And there are significant suspicions, some saying that Harper Lee is suffering from some form of dementia, some saying that Harper Lee has no idea what it is that she has signed in terms of allowing this sequel to be published, that somebody could put a piece of paper in front of her, and that if her sister or lawyer was not there to tell her this is not what you want, she will just go along with it. And there are serious concerns, Lewis, that we are seeing this incredible announcement of a forthcoming novel by Harper Lee, which, by the way, was written before she even wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, but it takes place 20 years after To Kill a Mockingbird, that as exciting as it is, it may be wrapped in with some pretty significant elder abuse, or at least taking advantage of someone.
It definitely could be. We'll have to wait and see how this unfolds. I'm not really sure what to think about it, but I guess I'm just curious to see what the book is like. This is one I might actually pick up and read because I did read To Kill a Mockingbird.
A fantastic book. Yeah, incredible. And Tanya Carter, Harper Lee's attorney since Alice Lee retired at the age of 100, acknowledges that the author, who was left forgetful and nearly blind and deaf after a 2007 stroke, often doesn't understand the contracts she signs. Quote, Lee has a history of signing whatever's put in front of her, apparently sometimes with Carter's advice. So hugely exciting as an avid reader and fan of To Kill a Mockingbird, but also potentially very, very disturbing. And we'll continue to follow it and see what does happen. It appears that this sequel is slated for release sometime this summer of 2015. Any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, or complaints? Call our voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail I received very recently.
This is Elder Tommy Tyler of the Sword of the Lord Primitive Baptist Church in Willacoochee, Georgia. And I'm calling you to tell you that was not what you use that big word, satire.
All right, so let me pause right there. This is the guy who left a very religious voicemail a couple weeks ago, and we said, is this satirical or not? It's really borderline. The voice sounds satirical, but he also sounds serious, and now he is calling and saying it is indeed not satire. Let's continue.
Joke, as normal people would say. I was the direct word of the living Lord directed right at you, and that secular humanist, whatever, Lewis, and the rest of you secular humanists in New York City, filled with a bunch of Unitarians and blasphemers and humanists and Episcopalians and Roman Catholics and Jews and all the huge stew pot, a cauldron of satanic.
Okay, he got cut off there seemingly. I am increasingly convinced that it is satire, Lewis. Even though the content of the voicemail was to tell us that the previous voicemail was not satire, that can't possibly be real, can it?
I'm starting to think it's real. And Sword of the Lord Ministries is real. And I think the funniest part about this is calling satire a big word. And to him, I would say, I think Deuteronomy is a big word.
That's why I can't imagine that this is real, because clearly the guy is actually well-spoken. And I don't know if he's reading off of a script or if he actually can come up with this stuff just offhand. But you seem more convinced that it's real. I am now more convinced that it's satirical.
Oh, I think it's real. And if I'm wrong, well, give the guy an Oscar.
On today's bonus show, Britain says yes to 3-person babies. Florida cannot contain the pythons. And the P.F. Chang gluten-free lawsuit. Gluten-free lawsuits. Very, very compelling stuff. Lewis will talk to us about that and more on today's bonus show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up for membership and get access to the bonus show. And I have 2 discounted memberships left, $31 each, for my 31st birthday, which was a couple of days ago. 2 memberships left. Email us through our website if you would like one of those 2 remaining discounted memberships.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.